This is what Jesus commanded us to do right before he left. This was his final instructions to us to go and make disciples. And yet 9 out of 10 believers, if you talk to them and said, how are you making disciples? Have you made a disciple this year? They wouldn't know how to do it, and they would not be obeying that command. So we are in widespread, deliberate disobedience to the direct command of Christ. And when we say that he is Lord and he is King, and then we ignore the clearest command that he gave in the New Testament, it's very confusing.
Hey friends, welcome to the 1000 Houses podcast, where we encourage and equip households to make disciples in and through the home. Every episode, you'll hear interviews, teachings, and conversations around what it looks like to turn your home into a hub for mission, community, and discipleship. If you'd like to learn more about what entering into a season of coaching might look like for you and your household, visit 1kh.org for more info. Let's jump into today's episode.
Excited to be able to talk to you all about disciple making. This is a extremely important part of our faith, and I really and a very neglected and for so many people, I think a challenging, confusing part. So really excited to share with you guys some of our thoughts that we've been working on through 1000 Houses. I'm going to blast through some information for y'all. Our disciple making process is called Life on Life Discipleship. We do here at 1000 Houses. So 1KH 1000 Houses is the kind of umbrella organization that is doing coaching for those who want to make disciples, or anyone who wants to start like a house church or house community. We have coaching for that as well as those who want to do evangelism reach out of their houses. But tonight we're going to talk about the cohort that's launching around Life on Life Discipleship. So our plan tonight, introduce ourselves real quick, which we've done. Brent Krutoff, who's on the call as well. He's a part of 1000 Houses. He is the kind of assistant coach for the cohort that we're launching. So he'll be, Brent and I will be working with you guys. He's going to be making sure all the logistics are handled, walking through as you guys are working on your assignments. And so you'll hear a lot from Brent over the course of the 3 months. What we're going to do is the way I like to present our blueprint is to talk through the top 10 disciple making mistakes that we've noticed that we're trying to correct, that we've made virtually all of these. And so we want to talk about them, the 10 distinctives of Life on Life, and then how to work, how you guys can get involved if you want to apply to be part of the cohort for 3 months, how that will work. So we're going to end pretty sharp at 9. I guess it depends on what time zone you guys are at, but at the hour. So we'll do this pretty quickly. So if you guys have questions, we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A as well. So jump in there. Real quick, just to introduce myself. This is a little bit about my disciple making bio. So discipleship completely changed my life. Between my 9th and 10th grade year in high school, a man named Ed Kelly, he took me away on a retreat and agreed to spend 6 months discipling me. I didn't know what that meant, but we got together every single week, and he walked me through a lot of the basics of the Christian life. And I went from, I would say, a fairly confused follower of Jesus and very much drifting away from, I think, my faith, to being totally on fire for the Lord. Went back into high school, my 10th grade year, and just was a completely transformed person. So it's very important to me, part of my story and just how God really formed my DNA. I still operate, my faith is very much operating from a lot of the things that Ed imparted to me during those 6 months, even at that kind of young age. My senior year of high school, I got mono and spent 3 or 4 months just exhausted, as you are with mono, sleeping basically 22 hours a day. And I was coming out of this fog. It was like, I was very, very sick. And I started to read this book called Dawes, which is a biography of a man named Dawson Trotman, who started a group called the Navigators. And Dawson was obsessed with disciple making. And he was, one of his things, he was, when Billy Graham first was getting started, Doss was trying to help him figure out how to do discipleship for all his crusades. The Navigators are primarily a ministry that started, at least in the military, there's a really interesting moment in Dawson's life early on where he was discipling 6 guys. And so one of them was in the Navy, and the guy came to Dawson and said, "Hey, I just led this guy to Christ, and I can't wait to introduce him to you and have you disciple him as well." And Dawson's response to that was, "No, you disciple him." And his apprentice said, "Oh, I can't do that." And Dawson said, if you're not able to disciple him and give him what I gave you, everything I've done up till now has been worthless. So that was like a turning point in the life of like the navigators, where Dawson insisted on multiplication, and the movement just exploded. So that impacted me huge as a senior. And so I organized a discipleship conference for my city. I brought together all these different people who were making disciples, and that kind of started this idea that I would say in a large part have been confused ever since why this is not a bigger deal. And we're going to get into lots of details. I've got lots of ideas and theories about that, but I don't feel like I've ever gotten over the idea that this is such an important part of the Christian life. This is what Jesus commanded us to do right before he left. This was his final instructions to us to go and make disciples. And yet, 9 out of 10 believers, if you talk to them and said, "How are you making disciples? Have you made a disciple this year?" They wouldn't know how to do it, and they would not be obeying that command. So we are in widespread, deliberate disobedience to the direct command of Christ. And when we say that he is Lord and he is King, and then we ignore the clearest command that he gave in the New Testament, that just it's very confusing. Like, as Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what I say?" So thank you guys so much for being a part of this, because this is why we're here. You guys want to make sure you are obeying this command. I want to obey this command. This is so important for the kingdom of God. So now I would say the next part of my bio is just kind of confusion on the how to do discipleship. I went from very like almost programmatic discipleship, where like one-on-one, where I would meet one person and try to disciple them for a year, to getting very influenced by kind of an idea that, oh, it's just organic. You just kind of do life together, and then disciples are kind of made by osmosis. Back again to like, no, this is an intentional thing that you need to like decide to do with certain people. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm very interested in the disciple making movement, DMM, 3DM, all these different groups that have really tried to crack this code. I think we really need to work together to learn why this is working. But what we continue to see is that these movements explode overseas and tend to fail in the West. And so a big part of what we're going to talk about during the course of this cohort is, what are the tweaks that we need to do to some of these really powerful movements that are working all over the world to cause them to actually work here in our context. And that is not an easy thing to solve. So we're going to really work hard on trying to understand that. So we've wrote the Life on Life blueprint in order to try to address the problem of multiplication in the West. One of the questions that we're obsessed with at 1KH is any movement in a Western context that is consistently getting to the 4th generation. So a disciple who makes a disciple who makes a disciple who makes a disciple. And that's very rare in our context. There's something unique about Western Christian culture that sterilizes disciple making. It stops it from multiplying. And so we need to be really trying to figure this out. And then what I do now, my current disciple making practice is I take on 2 groups of apprentices per year. My wife does the same thing. Our kids are involved as well. So this is a part of something that we actively practice as a family. So, all right, guys, I'm going to dive into the 10 top disciple making mistakes, starting with underestimating the worship service dilemma. So one of the problems I mentioned is that there is widespread disobedience when it comes to Jesus's clear command to go and make disciples. And I think one of the reasons is that if you asked people, is there something that if you stop doing would make you feel like you're not really a Christian? In other words, you're not really following Jesus. And for 95% of Western Christians, the thing that would cause them to feel like they're not properly obeying Jesus is if they did not attend a worship service that week, or consistently. Somehow the clear, direct command to make disciples does not rise to the level of causing us to realize that we're in disobedience. But not attending a worship service does create that feeling for most Christians. I think this creates a real dilemma for disciple making, because what often happens is that people, whether they do it on purpose, and I think many pastors try to combat this problem as well, but generally speaking, people believe there is a religious culture that we are dealing with that says that attending a worship service is at some level the foundational essence of what it means to follow Jesus, and we have to work through that intuition that we have. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with attending worship services. It's just odd that this one particular practice has somehow been elevated to the primacy within our context. So much so that people often, once they are achieving that, kind of sit back and become quite passive. And so we're going to talk a lot about that challenge. Another one that I mentioned is that there is a widespread belief that discipleship should be purely organic. Now, Jesus didn't practice it this way. He called individual people to be discipled. He named them. There was at least 100 people following him when he chose the 12. We're given even the way that Jesus chose them, that he went to a mountain to pray all night and then called these 12 people. And then, of course, he also had a group of 3 that he was very focused on. But today, a lot of people, they just are like, hey, discipleship just happens organically. It just happens naturally. You don't need to be intentional about it. I do not believe that that rises to the level of being true discipleship. So we're going to talk about that. We believe that's a mistake. One of the huge challenges that we face is, in our context in particular, people believe that you have to be at a certain level of maturity to make disciples. I told the story about Dawson Trotman and the first person he discipled. And after, discipling him for 6 to 12 months, this man named Spencer, Dawson released him to begin the process of disciple making. Now, overseas, people really take this on as well and feel comfortable making disciples. But in the West, we have almost a bias towards, maybe if after I'm a believer for 20 or 30 years, I'll be mature enough to pass on the lessons or the things that I've received and disciple somebody else. This has caused, that is the end of multiplication if the bar is that high. And oftentimes in the course, we'll talk about the challenge of, I think that the question, we ask the wrong question. Western people tend to ask the question, who's the best person that could possibly ever disciple? If I'm not at the very top of that list, I shouldn't be doing this. And I feel like that's almost like asking, before you have children, who's the best person that I know or in the world that, could be a father? Okay, I guess, or a mother. I guess I'm not ready then, right? And of course, if we did that, none of us would ever have children. The amazing thing is God gives us children way before, we're really the most mature at this. And now that my 5th child is almost an adult, April and I often, joke that now we're ready to become parents. So I think that it's really important that we dive into this and encourage others to dive into the process of imparting what we have. And we're going to talk about, some of the ways that we can encourage each other to do this in a way that isn't falling prey for this sort of level of professional expectation. Another one that I think is something that we resist at in Life on Life is a one-size-fits-all curriculum. This is extremely tempting. I'm going to talk a little bit in the 10 distinctives about why we don't do this. But there are so many disciple-making resources, booklets, books, things that, and so however you disciple people, they're likely going to disciple others. And so there's a lot of using kind of out of the box curriculums for disciple making. So we'll talk a little bit about how we think about those, but that's one of the things that we resist in this blueprint. Another one is blueprints designed by full-time professionals. So I talk to a lot of pastors, and oftentimes they will disciple in a way that works for their schedule and at a level of intensity that they can sustain as a full-time pastor. The problem is, like I mentioned, how you've been discipled is how you're going to disciple. And so oftentimes it's a very transformational experience for the disciplee, for the apprentice, but the blueprint itself is just unrealistic for the non-professional person who has a very full and busy life. And so oftentimes these blueprints collide. And so what might work for somebody who's in full-time ministry that same blueprint may not be sustainable for the person that they're hoping will replicate this. And of course, we're trying to get to the fourth generation. This has got to work for a lot of people. Another one is underestimating the multiplication problem. This is something we're going to talk a lot about during the cohort. It's extremely difficult, and I mentioned that there are forces uniquely sterilizing the multiplication of disciples in our context, in our culture. And so we take the multiplication problem in the West extremely seriously. And a lot of the blueprint and a lot of what we're going to talk about is how do you get the seed in the fruit? I think Dennis, you're the one who said something about like making seedless grapes. I love that analogy. Yeah. So we do
Yep.
do that a lot. We inadvertently make seedless grapes, and so we need to, as Genesis 1 says over and over again, God emphasizes in the creation account when he created everything, he put the seed in the fruit. He put the seed in, and so many disciple making it's exceptionally tricky to put the seed in the fruit in our culture. We're going to talk about why we can overcome it. We believe that by working together and have some coaching and a thoughtful blueprint, we can fix this problem. But we take it very seriously. Another major mistake that we see in a lot of disciple making in the West is not clarifying the high bar up front. So when we invite somebody to follow us as we follow Christ, to be discipled, we need to raise a high bar on day one. If you beg people to join your disciple making process, if you make lots and lots of exceptions, if you communicate that this is something that you will endlessly bend or do anything to help them become a part of this process and keep the bar really, really low in order to get people to say yes, then that's going to kind of compromise the entire process. Disciple making is a high challenge, high bar process. And we cannot lower the bar and think that we're going to get the fruit, let alone multiplication of that fruit. So this is a mistake that we're going to be talking a lot about as well. Another one that I run into a lot is thinking that some other ministry that's not really designed to multiply disciples can replace disciple making. Probably the best example of that is small groups. So there's a problem that happens in churches that was discovered and very deeply investigated over the last 20 or 30 years, especially, and that is that pastors discovered that if new parishioners, new attendees of a worship service or a church do not form 2 to 3 meaningful relationships within the first 6 months, they will leave out the back door of the church. And so, in trying to solve this problem, churches all over the world have adopted small group ministries to close the back door and help people form meaningful relationships. And most of these small group ministries are designed around peer groups, finding friends, really. And it does work. And if you're going to have a worship service, then you really do need to pair that worship service with a dynamic small group ministry. Otherwise, people will flow right out of the worship service to the next church until they find some friends or some relationships. People need to be connected. There's a huge problem with this strategy, though, if you believe that it's going to replace disciple making. First of all, peer relationships are the opposite of what we're going to be describing as disciple making, where it's clear that there's a disciple maker and an apprentice. And so that oftentimes violates the design of many small group ministries. Small group ministries oftentimes will suffer from an aggressive multiplication strategy, whereas disciple making is it's critical for there to be aggressive multiplication. There's a lot of tension between these two strategies. They can overlap, but they don't overlap very naturally. And nine times out of 10, a church will default to what's best for small group ministry over what's best for disciple making, which is totally fine. And I actually believe that's the best route to go. I just think you can't call it discipleship. you have to separate these ideas. And so we're going to talk about that as well. And then the next one is not tracking the fruit. So we're going to, everyone, if you guys get involved in this and really deeply commit to the blueprint that we're going to be presenting to you over the next 3 months, then we want to spend the next 5 to 10 years tracking what happens with your disciple making movement. Our hope for every person that's going through the cohort is not that you would make disciples, but that you would, each of you, start a disciple making movement. That if we look 5, 10 years from now, will be affecting hundreds or thousands of people. That's very possible. And that's why we have to design this very carefully from the very beginning, because that's what we're after. But we need to actually track that and see. There's a lot of people talk about discipleship as if, if if one person disciples 2 people, those 2 people disciple 2 people, and on and on and on. If you do the math, the whole world will be discipled in 30 years, right? That's just simple exponential curve. But that doesn't happen. Why not? Because we don't actually discover that in much of that simple math, there's so many things that degrade the multiplication effort. And if we don't track, we can't find those things and fix them. And so we really want you guys to help us figure out how to improve this blueprint. Like, we don't believe this is done. We don't think we've cracked every code. We believe this is working, and we're going to talk about some of the distinctives in a minute. But man, we need to be really hard on the data, and we're gonna try to do that together. So that's one of the things that just 1,000 Houses as a organization is very committed to. As a ministry, we want to be tracking the fruit, and so we want to stay connected to you guys for the long term and see how many of you through your disciple making efforts are actually seeing a movement start, not just some one-off growth happen. So those are the top 10. Oh, last one. And this is, I think, something I'm really excited for us to figure out, is we've got to celebrate the fruit. So you will only really get people to commit to things that over the long term that are being lifted up and celebrated. And I don't know when the last time you've been to an event that celebrates discipleship or disciple making that describes the kind of transformation that's happening. We have to pull off these kinds of events. Our family is really committed to doing this every single year, bringing together people that are making disciples in our city. So if you guys are in Cincinnati, we'd love for you guys to be part of that. But I really believe we have to figure this out. And this is another thing that 1,000 Houses wants to help you guys figure out, how to celebrate this. And that, I think, is part of what's going to create more of a citywide movement as opposed to something that's very isolated. Okay. So those are the mistakes that we're trying to correct through, the cohort, through the training, through the blueprint. I hope you guys can see that with a lot of those mistakes, they're really easy to make. And again, most of those mistakes I've been a part of making. And so part of the reason why, you might ask, why go through 3 months of training? Because I think those are really sometimes very difficult to overcome. And so a lot of the training is going to be working to try to work through that. Now, there's a lot of different disciple making blueprints out there. And a lot of them are very effective and are having a ton of traction and fruit. And so it's really important that you guys understand. And we don't think, again, we're not saying we're the best, we're the only, but we do think that it's really important for you to commit to a particular blueprint because of all the challenges that I listed. Now, I want to walk through some of the distinctives of this blueprint so that you guys can be aware. Okay, if we dive into this, what are we getting into? What are the things that this is going to entail? So here are some of the top 10 things that are kind of distinctive about this. Number one, we believe in what we call immersion events. These are getaways that you do with the people you're discipling. In the West, we have a real problem with life on life discipleship. We live what sociologists call like an atomized existence. So we tend to live in neighborhoods, and our neighbors are atomized in a way that they don't, it's separate from where we work, which is separate from where we go to church, which is separate from our families. And so which oftentimes is even separate from our friendships and our hobbies. And so once you live your life in this way, it's extraordinarily difficult to take on an apprentice or for them to actually see your life. And so there's a lot of tools we're going to use to try to transition disciple making from being some kind of like curriculum that you're just teaching somebody to being a life transfer. But one of the tools that is really effective at this that I think we really need to take full advantage of is immersion events. And so we recommend 2 immersion events over the course of a season of discipleship, one at the beginning, one at the end. These have they create a ton of traction in the disciple making process. A kickoff immersion event, and what I do for mine, for example, is just a 24-hour getaway with the guys I'm discipling. We'll go to a hotel somewhere. We'll go, camping. We'll do some kind of immersion event. This is extremely helpful. I learned this when I was a youth pastor that, if I could get a kid to come to youth group for 6 months or go on one retreat, I would pick a retreat every time. It would change their life. We get closer relationally. So I think that in the West, this is a really important tool. And then we'll talk a lot about how we use the send-off immersion event. But these are one of the distinctives of our blueprint. One of the things that we do, I mentioned that we really need to clarify the high challenge. One of the things you're going to do through this 3 months is you're going to write an email to a prospective apprentice, and it's going to outline the high challenge or high bar that is a part of your disciple making. You're going to make these investments in them. You're going to need, they're going to need to rise to and agree to these specific things as well. And so you want to give them, fair warning. And I always tell people in the email, like, look, I totally understand if this is not a great season. I'd love a chance to get to, to get to engage with you in a discipleship season. But I need to know that this is the right timing and that you can put in these things. So we're going to help you guys write that. One of the things that we're really hard on in this blueprint is defining discipleship. This word is incredibly slippery. It has been redefined radically in the last, even just 20 years. So back when I was a senior in high school, if you talked about discipleship, like I did when I was reading Dawson's book, to people generally in the church, all of them had the same basic picture in their mind, which was a process, of somebody taking on an apprentice. This is no longer the way that people think when you say the word discipleship. You'll oftentimes hear people say something like, they've heard a great sermon or they read a great book, and they'll say something like, that's really good for my discipleship. It's not about this process that's specific to what Jesus was referring to in Matthew 28. It's just about growth in general. And it's really important to separate. And I like kind of words like spiritual formation. We have other words to describe growth in general. We really need to preserve discipleship for what, and this is, we have a very particular criteria for how to define discipleship. And the criteria is your definition of discipleship has to be consistent with what the disciples thought Jesus meant when he said, go and make disciples. If your definition of discipleship is not what those disciples thought, then you've probably smuggled in something into the definition, or you've redefined the word from its biblical context. And so when we ask the question, what were the disciples thinking when Jesus said, go and make disciples? Well, Jesus just spent 3 years taking them through an apprenticeship. And so what we think that they heard Jesus say was something basically fairly clear and simple, which is discipleship is the process of taking on an apprentice to train them in how you follow or obey Jesus. That's what it is. It's got those 3 elements. It's a process that is training them on how in an apprenticeship. So it's a particular kind of process, which is defined by this word apprenticeship, on how you follow Jesus or how you obey Jesus. And so if it's not all 3 of those things, then I don't think it's consistent with what the disciples heard Jesus say. Now, one of the problems we have in our culture is we no longer educate through apprenticeships is common any longer. It still happens, but it's much more rare. And so we believe that it has to be an apprenticeship for it to be consistent with what Jesus was describing. So I'll talk a little bit more about why I think that's so important. One of the things that's unique about our approach is that all of 1KH is dedicated to the idea of family on mission and not simply individuals on mission. So we're happy to have singles jump into Life on Life, and we will train them. But if you are in a family context as a husband and wife, then we would love for this to be a central part of the way your family is on mission together. So currently, I'm in Denver right now. Um, because April, my wife, is doing discipleship with two ladies here in Colorado. So one of the things so our family is constantly supporting our kids as they make disciples. I'm out here supporting April as she's involved in a really intensive discipleship. 4 months with some ladies. They came and spent 48 hours at our house. Now she's flying to each of their houses. They do tons of Zoom calls, and then they're going to do a big send off immersion event in August. So anyway, we want this to be integrated into your whole family's mission strategy, and we're very excited to do that. We see Genesis 1:28, which is the mission given to the family to be fruitful and multiply, to fill, subdue, and rule, as being recapitulated in Matthew 28 when Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations." These are the same basic call. So Jesus told the disciples to be fruitful, which is to make disciples, but not just to make disciples, but to make disciples who make disciples, which is to multiply, to fill, which is to go to all the nations, to subdue, which is to teach them to obey everything, and and that He's the ruler. The whole reason for this is because Jesus is Lord, and that's the whole commission started when Jesus said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." So the mission given to the family and the mission given to the church are the same mission. One is the command to be fruitful and multiply through physical children. And the other is the command to be fruitful and multiply through spiritual children. So everything you're learning about fathering and mothering, we're going to bring into the process of disciple making. They are a similar process. Okay. Another thing we spent a lot of time trying to do is help you guys find apprentices. So we know this is a really difficult thing to try to figure out. And so we've got lots and lots of strategies for how to find people who are faithful, available, teachable, that are ready to be invited into a season of discipleship. So if you're looking at this saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't know anybody who might want to do this," we're going to spend a lot of time talking to you and coaching you how to find apprentices. There's a real balance in this blueprint between training meetings and coaching. And so part of what we recommend is that you have trainings, which are designed for kind of the disciple maker to be directly imparting lessons to the apprentice, and coaching, which is where the disciple maker is reacting to teachable events or a teachable season, a unique season in the life of the apprentice. So we'll talk. We have tools that are separate for both of these kinds of equipping of disciples. We center on Jesus and in the Gospels, and so one of the things we train you to do is to run a weekly Discovery Bible study in the Gospels in order to directly make sure that we're not just teaching them to follow us, but we're teaching people to follow us as we follow Christ. And so that's another key part of our blueprint. We dedicate the final immersion event to multiplication. This was something we discovered after we had designed this blueprint and started to use it with multiple groups, that we needed the immersion event at the end of the disciple making to be all about multiplication. So there's the kickoff events might look very different depending on who the disciple maker is. We recommend everybody do a pretty similar getaway for their send-off event in terms of content, because of the unique problem of multiplication in the West. So we're going to walk you guys through how to design the kind of send-off getaway that puts the seed in the fruit. And this really works. So we're excited for you guys to learn how to do that. One of the reasons we are not using kind of out of the box or a canned curriculum is because one of the distinctives of discipleship or apprenticeship is a bias for impartation over teaching. So one of the reasons we call this Life on Life is that we think you can only give people what you have. You cannot impart faith into an apprentice's life in an area where you are not actively practicing, which means it's very important that we identify the ways in which you are following Jesus, the things that you can impart. And we don't want you guys to feel any pressure to give any teaching to an apprentice that you are not currently following and it has not transformed your life. You do not own that. You cannot impart what you do not have. And so we give you full permission to say, look, your disciple making effort is not going to give your apprentices everything they need. That's okay. We want to relieve you of that pressure entirely. Our blueprint is designed around the fact that people, we would love to see people be discipled many times throughout the course of their life as they mature, but that you should only steward and impart to people things that you have, that you own personally. In other words, that you're practicing and that have deeply transformed your life. So we have a way of like identifying what those teachings are and helping you design those as impartations. So when I'm doing a training meeting with so many people, with guys I'm discipling, it's very important that the way that I do that, it's not, I can teach, but I'm not primarily using my gift of teaching in kind of the way that I think about it, like giving a presentation like this. I primarily impart, which is I tell them my testimony of how God transformed my life in this area, the scriptures that the Holy Spirit used to do this work in me. And there's a process where it's really a faith transfer that I'm going for. That's a different kind of experience than simply here's some head knowledge that I've accumulated. Let me download it to you. We do not want that to be the primary means of how we disciple people. And the last one I'll point out to you guys, and then we're going to do questions here in a second, is one of the things I love about the fact that you guys are doing a cohort with us is that when you disciple someone, everyone that you disciple will have access to Life on Life cohort as well. So at any point, you're like, hey, they're going to learn a lot from you. And hopefully, in a lot of cases, they'll like, oh, I get it. I think I could replicate this. And we're going to help train you how to do that. But if you ever talk to anybody who doesn't have a good blueprint, doesn't know how to make disciples who make disciples, or if anyone that you've discipled wants additional training, we're here. And you can just say, yeah, 3 weeks, sign up for the next cohort, and you can get like much more detailed training on how to make sure that you know how to make disciples as well. So this makes this a lot more pass-onable as well. So I want to show you guys a couple of pictures of our process. So this is one image that has the entire blueprint in it. So basically what we do, and this is sort of looking at a 6-month discipleship process. As I mentioned, kind of these kickoff getaways, 24-hour or weekend getaways, oftentimes those are like, can stand in for 6 months worth of intensity. So we start with one, and then there's 4 to 6 months of impartation. We have 4 tools that we're going to train you guys in. Trainings, which is what I mentioned, this is our like a specific training with your group of apprentices. We recommend you do it in groups. We'll talk about that why. Coachings, which is 1-to-1. So like in a typical month where I'm discipling, I will do 2 trainings during that month. I'll do 1 coaching, one-on-one with each of the 3 guys I'm discipling. I will usually invite them into one experience with me, like come to Shabbat at my house, or come to something I'm a part of. And then every week I'll jump on a Zoom call and do a discovery Bible study with them for an hour over lunch. I do mine on Fridays, and you guys are welcome to come and see that. So this is what we do. So we do the kickoff, where we really get to know each other. We do these 4 kinds of different tools that we wield during the 4 to 6 months when we're discipling. We do the send off, which puts the seed in the fruit. And at the send off getaway, when we're coming home, my goal is always to make sure that these the apprentices are 1 click away, literally 1 click away from starting their own group. So we can talk about how to do that, but it's really important that it be that detailed at your send off if you want to see the seed in the fruit, and then you can reflect and improve and kick off another group. All right. So who is a cohort for? This is for anyone who's dedicated to launching a group in the next 3 months. Now, it may take longer than that, but if you're excited and you're like, hey, what is it? It's starting in July, August, September, by September, October at the latest, I think I could get a group launched. Then this is great timing to go through this. If you're like, I probably couldn't do it this year, maybe it's 2026. It might be better to wait for the next cohort. We're going to be launching these but we wanted this to be as actionable as possible. So what's involved in Life on Life? It's going to take about an hour or 2 per week for you guys to go through the videos and do the assignments. We're going to do a coaching call at this time, starting in 2 weeks. So every other Tuesday night from 8 to 9 on Zoom. It's free. We'll talk to you guys if you want to contribute to 1KH, what that looks like. and it's going to last for 3 months. So we're going to try to make this as simple and clear as possible, but this is fairly intense. If you join this, you are committing to watching the videos, doing the assignments, and showing up at those coaching calls. Obviously, if you can't make it, just let us know. But that's the commitment that we want you guys to really do your best to keep. And what this is our whole kind of pathway for somebody who's trying to get a disciple making movement in their city. So learn and launch are really the two parts of the stages that we're going to be doing during the cohort 3 months. So you're going to learn, and then you're going to launch your first group. Then you're going to work through the improve, multiply, and celebrate on your own. But we're going to give you guys equipping to how to do that. So if you want to apply, that's over at 1kh.org/discipleship. So thank you guys. I know it's a lot. Boom. We recorded this. So if you want to slow that down or re-listen to anything, we'll have this available and shoot this off to you guys. But I want to pause for a few minutes. Like I said, unfortunately I've got another commitment in 5 minutes. So I want to ask if you guys have any questions, especially anything that I need to know this to decide if I could be part of the group. You can use this little hand raising thing. That's really helpful for me to know. And I would be happy to make sure that we get that question answered. So
Hey, Jeremy, I have a question.
yeah, go ahead, Joel.
The push on multiple people at once, is that why the push on that? It sounds like that's pretty strong point of view there.
Yeah. So, and we've walked people through both. People have tried one-on-one, people have tried one-on-three. So most of the time, what we've discovered is that there's actually an advantage to 3, just from a straight transformational perspective. I think it's easier on the disciple maker. I think it creates a group dynamic. It's more consistent with how Jesus actually did it. And because he always did it his in groups. But it does require you to do those coaching meetings one-on-one, because you don't want to there's a one-on-one dynamic. I think it's really important to discipleship. And then obviously, it's better in terms of, doing 3 if you can. So I think in this blueprint, we believe that it's better to do 3 with using this blueprint. I think it works better, but this blueprint you could do with 1, you certainly could. And so it would be up to, that's actually would not be a problem if somebody said, hey, I want to do this blueprint, but want to do it with 1, it would work with 1. But so far, virtually everyone I've coached who've done both said they ended up feeling the actual experience was better with the group. So that's just kind of been our experience so far. I think we got time for one more question and then let you guys go. Anybody else got anything that'd be helpful?
Thinking of doing this with multiple little kids, have you seen, is it just better for a certain age range of kids and capacity, I guess, for people that would want to do this? So my kids right now are 6, 4, 3, and 6 months. I've always been interested in doing this, but I have to be aware of our capacity as a family. Do you see it just more when they get at a certain older age that this is more feasible, or people actually do it, depending, I guess, on their family dynamic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And especially for us, almost everybody that we know that we disciple has 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. Most of them's young and are wrestling with the same question. So, there's one of 2 possibilities. One is that mothers and fathers of young children should wait, for 10, 15, 20 years until their kids are older before they start disciple making. And I think a lot of parents do that. My belief is that this is the number 1 rhythm of the Christian life. And so if somebody says, look, while you're having young children, you shouldn't have any rhythms that aren't directly in your house with your kids, then okay. But I don't know anybody who thinks that. Everyone believes there are at least 1 or 2 rhythms that even a busy young mother or father should be a part of. So the question really is, where does this fit in the stack of priorities of different things you're a part of? And so my conviction is this is number 1. This is what it is for our family. And so you have to decide, every family has to decide where that fits, though. Because you can't, with young kids, you can't have 4, 5, 6 things you're doing. That would distract from your kids. But it's okay to do it. I think even very busy families in very busy seasons have, 1 or 2 rhythms that they're participating in. We just think this should be one of those 1 or 2 rhythms. The other thing that I would say that's really important for young families to understand is that as we disciple apprentices, our kids are target-rich environments for our apprentices to disciple. And so our kids have gotten enormous amounts of fruit from our discipleship. Like all of my kids have been discipled at different seasons from people that are 1, 2, or 3 discipleship generations removed from me or April. And so it ended up giving back a ton to our kids, especially as they got older. It was a massive game changer to have our kids discipled by multiple people who had very different DNA than we did in a way that was really, really helpful for them in their faith. So those are kind of the 2 things I would say to consider. And that's how we've thought about this. So, but yeah, it's certainly not easy to do during that season.
No, thank you for the thoughts and appreciate everything.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. All right, guys, I'll let y'all go. So good to see you guys, and yeah, excited to see many of you in the cohort.
Well, friends, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about 1,000 Houses or discover what a season of coaching might look like for you and your household, visit 1kh.org. We'll see you for the next episode.